Good evening. My name is Paige Bronk. I am the town's Economic and Community Development Manager. I want to thank you for coming tonight. We have some great news dealing with the Mystic Education property. I know people have waited for a long time to understand more about this concept and the project. Before I get started, I do want to recognize some special people. Mayor Patrice Granikowski, Council Conrad Heed, Council Rita Schmidt, Council Leanne Aubry, Council Rachel Franco, and Councilwoman Portia Bordelon. Happy birthday, by the way. Also, Andre Baumgardner. Thank you, Andre. Also, members of the RTM, State Representative Christine Connolly, Town Manager John Burt, other municipal staff who are very much engaged in supporting this effort, members of the Economic Development Commission, as well as the Conservation Commission, and last but not least, our Planning and Zoning Commission. If I've left anyone out, I do apologize. I think it's easy to say that this will definitely be a team effort within the town of Groton and beyond. We're very excited about the partnership. We had actually hoped for a while to reveal this concept for several months. And I think the first time I had mentioned it was sometime in the spring. It's very difficult to actually pin down an exact date, but there are a lot of moving pieces, and it was everyone's desire, including the developer, to come forward at the appropriate time, and I think that time is now. What we hope to do tonight is basically a few things. Make the announcement, and we have been delayed on that announcement due to some transactional matters with the state. It is state property, as you're aware, and we had to get to a point where agreements were in place before we could go public. Also want to introduce the development team, which is here tonight, and we'll get to that shortly. We want to illustrate the redevelopment concepts, and that's important. I did use the word redevelopment for a reason. There are a number of properties that we have within Groton that we are focused on redeveloping. It's not just development. That'll take place in Groton as well, but we are doing our best to take our existing housing stock and properties that have already been developed in past decades and try to repurpose them, and that's what you'll see tonight. Also, we will illustrate the particular concepts and the uses that are being proposed on this property. And then lastly, we want to allow the public to engage with the team. That'll happen a couple ways. This is not a hearing tonight, but we are very much interested in getting some input. We will take a few questions at the end of the presentation, but this is nowhere near any approval or permitting phase. We're several months away from gaining any approvals. There have not been any applications made, so this is really an announcement. To some degree, it's a celebration of the work that's taken place to date and trying to brief everyone where we're at. The details are very much still being addressed at this point in time, and that is unique, I suppose, in that most of the time the projects are revealed when someone might read about it, that it's on an agenda that's going to go before a zoning board. That's not where we're at tonight. We really want to try to give you an update regarding how far we've come and the overall concepts before anything advances forward. The public will always have an opportunity to engage in those future meetings. It's going to take months for us to get through. And let me talk a little bit about Groton's economic development efforts to date. We did complete a 2016 market analysis, and we've really tried hard to focus and prioritize some of our strategies moving forward. And one of those strategies was to focus on some of these vacant properties that we have, and there are a number of them. A lot of them are school buildings. This is the largest one that we have, but we also have Sealy, Colonel Ledyard, Groton Heights, which we've already covered. We have Pleasant Valley, Colonel Ledyard, the list goes on. And really, to some degree, the best development is redevelopment. So we need to actually focus on those properties that are vacant today so that we can get them back on the tax rolls. I've mentioned in the past this 80% statistic. What that is basically 80% of the jobs in Groton are held by commuters. So in essence, we could have 5 million jobs in Groton, but if 4 million people are exiting every day with their paychecks being spent somewhere else, we haven't closed the loop. And we believe one of the ingredients to that loop is providing the right type of housing. It's not just the numbers of housing, but it's the right housing product. The quality of that product has to actually adhere to what a younger workforce, and to some degree, maybe empty nesters are seeking. It's an amenity-rich housing product. It's a place that people actually would be proud to live in, oftentimes a village or a location that they could walk to a lot of amenities. Also, one of the benefits with reuse is that it addresses brownfield sites. This particular property is a brownfield site. It's an old property, and it's been around for many decades. There are contaminants within it, and it's better for us to actually address that through adaptive reuse than letting those buildings go idle. And the other problem with the buildings is if we don't address them in a timely manner, they are not able to actually be addressed in a feasible way. The roof within this property leaks, windows, doors, a lot of water access, and we're experiencing a lot of vandalism these days as well. Case in point, this last weekend, Groton police had to respond. The more these existing buildings are basically deprived of the attention that they need, the more difficult it's going to be to preserve them as historic assets. So we really have a time crunch in trying to address this property in particular, but others as well. So let me talk about the property a little bit before we get into the developer. Property's been vacant since roughly 2012. The property entails roughly 80 acres, give or take. There are two parcels. One is the larger parcel, which is somewhat bifurcated in state control. DECD, the Department of Economic and Community Development, controls the upper portion where you see the building, both buildings, and then the lower portion where you have the steep slopes, the woods, and it actually goes down to the river. That's controlled by DEEP. So it's one property owned by the state of Connecticut, but it's controlled by two different agencies. The other smaller parcel is across the street from Oral School Road, and that's roughly about 8 acres in size, also state controlled. The other point I want to mention is that up through roughly 2018, the state did allocate some resources, including security, to the property, but that's not the case anymore. And I already had talked about some vandalism and people accessing the building, but it's vulnerable at this point in time in that the state is no longer providing any resources. It's my understanding it used to cost them to maintain this idle building roughly somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 annually. That's pretty expensive in my opinion for a building that's not being used. In terms of marketing, we were asked by the state, Groton was asked by the state to help assist with the marketing on the property. We agreed to that. We have a vested interest in doing that. We want this on the tax roll. We want to reuse these properties. We want it done in the right way. One of the things I always mention is that we're not interested in simply marketing the property for a transaction, a real estate transaction. We're interested in actually seeing the right redevelopment. It takes effort, takes time to actually find the partner that you want, to actually execute the plan that they submitted to make sure that it's done right. We had a number of site visits. A lot of developers came in, and we were probably out there, no joke, between all staff, close to 100 times in showing the property and trying to forge these partnerships. Ultimately, we drafted a request for proposals. We had tried to get the word out the best we can, advertising, social media, we use our own websites and the contacts that we have. And we did receive a number of proposals, qualified proposals. The panel that reviewed those proposals was a combined team between the state and the town of Groton. We had 4 different agencies from the state that participated. It is somewhat cumbersome going through a state process. We needed all of their involvement, and we're still to some degree involved in trying to deal with the property. Some of the criteria within the RFP, project approach, team qualifications and experience, project viability, ability to execute project in a timely manner, and the benefit to the town and state. RFP went out in December 2017. We did most of our review, multiple interviews, communications back and forth in 2018. A lot of dialogue in 2019 with the state and our preferred developer, and that leads us to where we're at tonight. After an extensive process, multiple interviews, state and town due diligence, we are pleased to have found what we believe is our best preferred developer, Respro Homes, who is here tonight, their entire team. I just want to say as a concluding statement, the town, the state, and Respro Homes have truly forged a solid public-private partnership for redevelopment of the Mystic Education Center property into an outstanding mixed-use project addressing needs for modern housing, land conservation, public recreation, historic preservation, job creation, local income preservation, and infrastructure upgrades. At this time, it's my pleasure to actually turn over the meeting to the Respro team and to Jeff Respler.
Thank you, Paige, for that warm introduction. We want to thank the town as well as the state for selecting us as a preferred developer. We're very humble but very, very excited to move forward with this project. Just to talk a little bit about myself and my partners, we actively, through different partnerships, go around the country looking for properties that are underused or underutilized that need rehabilitation. Usually other developers, similar to this property, just walked away from it because it was just too much of a monumental task in order to bring it back into the rent rolls, and also because it just wasn't a viable entity to do it. We usually find intricate or thinking out of the box in order to create and bring that properties back into a viable entity. Myself, I've been in the state of Connecticut already for 8 years. We have quite a few projects that we're working on within the state. We're in Beacon Falls, we're in Berlin, Connecticut, we're in Beacon Falls, Connecticut as well. But Beacon Falls, Berlin, we're in East Windsor, and we're working on getting a project approved right now in Middlebury, just to talk about us a little bit in the state. I was introduced to the oral school through a colleague well before there was an RFP. It was around 9 months to a year before. I got a phone call and they said, "Oh, we got a great property for you." And it was an old school. It could be transformed. There's certain type of programs within the federal government and the state where there's some money that allows you to repurpose old mills or old school buildings or old commercial buildings into some sort of housing units. So I thought, oh, maybe this will be a viable candidate for that, and I'll go out and take a look at it. When I came up and saw the property, and it's just a beautiful piece of property on top of the mountain overlooking the river, and our team walked through the school itself. This was not a project that could be turned into housing. As you know, this was a school for the deaf, the hearing impaired, and the classrooms were very small. They were designed for one-on-one, one-on-two. The hallways are small. This is not, even though it's a huge building, it was not made for a massive amount of students. And just it wasn't laid out properly in order to have like a corridor with apartments on the side or some sort of assisted living facility with units on the side with a central corridor. It just was not cut out like that. If we would have tried to create something like that there would have been a lot of compromises. There would have been a lot of underutilized spaces. And the hallways would have been broken up. It would not have been a happy place to live in. Let me put it that way. So that cannot be the use. We tried to hammer our heads. We couldn't come up with anything. And over the months, the RFP came out. But right before that, we actually spoke and we said, let's go out and meet some of the large business employers. Let's go out to see Pfizer. Let's go out to see Electric Boat, General Dynamics. Let's see how they foresee, what's going on in the community, what's going on, how this property could be used. And one of the themes were from Electric Boat is that, it was interesting because, they have, when they design whatever, a sonar array, there's like 15 or 20 different vendors that are associated with that. And they all need to talk to each other and collaborate with each other. And a lot of times, as you know, you pick up the phone, you call them, they're not in, they're gonna call you back, you're not in, you need to speak to a third person, it takes weeks to get stuff done. And they needed some sort of a collaborative flex type of space that they can bring a lot of people in so they can have meetings together face to face and work on problems that are associated with developing submarines and different naval vessels. So that was interesting. And they also had a huge problem with attracting the young, upward, mobile professional, the engineers, the people that that they need to work there, because they didn't have really the proper housing stock. According to them, a lot of people are living in Hartford, and they got to travel in because they want that type of life. They want a vibrant community. They're out going down to Old Saybrook. Of course, some are local, but a lot of them are not. And as Paige has mentioned, around 80% of them are not in town. As they're going to grow, their biggest concern was that if they can't find viable places for them to live locally, they're not going to stay, and they're not retaining the labor force, these professionals. They're moving on. We also spoke to Pfizer, and they had similar housing issues. We then went, this is, again, we're talking over months, so this is not something that happened in 2 days. The RFP came out, and we actually sat down with the town. We wanted to try to understand how they foresee it, what their issues are, what their problems are with the town. And I tell you, this town is lucky in one way, and it's, I guess, a credit to the staff and to the local state reps that you don't have an employment problem here. A lot of towns want to try to grow their workforce base. That's not the problem here. Your problem is an opposite problem, how to keep the workforce base here, because you don't have viable housing for them. You spoke briefly about it, but the economics of having hundreds of millions of dollars go out to other towns and other states, it just doesn't support the business community. Forget about Electric Boat or Pfizer, but just the local pharmacies and the local stores. They need economic input for people for these stores to grow and modernize. So we went back, we thought about it. Somehow a light bulb, it seems easy now, but it wasn't. But a light bulb came up and he said, you know what? Why don't we create like a New England village? Something where the oral school itself will become like a commercial hub. That would be the center, the Main Street New England, the Main Street USA. That would be the oral school itself, and surrounding it would be a community of homes and apartments that will feed off the oral school, and the oral school will feed off of them. Then we remembered what was spoken about by Electric Boat and others, and flex space, open office space is perfect for the oral school because it allows you to use all the different nooks and crannies of the school. It allows you what apartments which need rigid rooms and a lot of it would be underutilized with an office space. It's wide open on a flex office space, and they'll be able to use most of the space. What else could be done in there? We were thinking, and we said, you know what? If we have this small village, we'll create an organic market, something in there for another 5,000 or 6,000 square feet that will, it's not meant to replace a Stop and Shop or anything like that, but it's, you come home from work, you need a milk, you need vegetables, you need whatever, you can run to a place right on the premises and you can grab it. The Gen Zers and the millennials that were spoken about by Electric Boat and others, they like a vibrant place to live. They have very special housing requirements. They just don't want to go to an apartment somewhere and not have structure around it that will give them their lifestyle. They like to leave work and they like to go with their friends and go to a local, restaurant, bar and sit down and, have conversations, have a drink or two. Afterwards, they want to run out and they want to work out. And what's great about it is, I don't know, we didn't speak about it yet, but there's the Pratt Recreation Building, which in its heyday was a state-of-the-art facility. It was a 40,000 square foot recreational facility. I think a lot of residents in town are aware of it because they used to go there. And part of our RFP proposal was to rehabilitate this building and put it to town use as well as the village resident use. We're negotiating and we're talking to the town about how we're going to put that all together, but that's definitely in our RFP that we are going to redevelop it and use it for however it's done for all the residents in the town of Groton. But what's good about the Gen Zers and the millennials is that that's what they want. They want to have a place where they congregate after work, blow some steam off, go work out. There's also, as you know, we're on the riverfront. And that was like another rumor that, somehow it came out there were a lot of stuff that we were hearing, and we were dying to bring this project out a long time ago. But for whatever reason, the state had new government put in place a year and a half ago. And a lot of their agencies, and we had to deal with 4 different agencies here, they didn't have their commissioners in place until this year. And we just, that's to the accreditment, and we'll talk about it, of the legal team to get this thing accomplished with the state. As a matter of fact, as of an hour ago, we still wouldn't even have the right to even present the property because we wouldn't have control of it. But thank God we do. And no, but it was a long haul. It was on. It was that each agency has their own objective. It just took a very long time. Certainly, we were not trying to be secretive or do anything behind the table. There were talk of why is this taking so long? Something's being done. This is a done deal. There's nothing done. This is the beginning of the process. And we have quite, now that we have the state working with us, now we have to sit down with the town. And there's a lot of different agencies we got to go through. In the town, there's a lot of open hearings where the public is going to be invited to comment. So this is really just the start of the process, as Paige has mentioned. But another crazy, well, I thought was crazy because we like to do things in a green way, was that we were going to somehow plow a road going up the mountain from River Road into our complex to give it access. I mean, it was never contemplated. It was never discussed. There were never a drawing board for something. I don't even know. As a matter of fact, as part of our agreement, we want to give Deep, they control it now, but they don't, the state is transferring the property to us. We want to deed it off and give it back to Deep so that it can stay in its natural habitat. The only thing that we want to do is create a nice natural walkway out of dirt or stone to give access from the top of the hill, lazily going down to the waterfront so that it could be used by the residents. That's it. Nothing else is going to be done over there. So if you hear people talking about that, please try to squash that rumor because it's not true. We're going to improve the waterfront a little bit. The boat launch needs some work. That area needs work, and we're going to improve that. So that these residents, as well as working out in, the millennials, they love going in canoes. They love going kayaks during the summer, so they would carry it down and through the dirt path, a little 3-foot wide path, and come down to the water, and they'd go on the water. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for a community with has activity and functioning for them. Afterwards, they'll go up, shower, go to the restaurant to eat, or they're going to walk, which is really nice. They're going to walk down that path again, and you're 15 minutes from downtown Mystic down there. Then there's a whole vibrant life in downtown Mystic, which they're going to enjoy, and then come back to the property. So What we're trying to create over here, and what we are creating, and again, this is all conceptual. So this is our idea and our vision of having the oral school feed off its surroundings, have the surroundings feed off the oral school, and make it for the Gen Zers, people that want, and not just the Gen Zers and millennials, but anyone that likes that type of lifestyle, that wants a life there. The restaurant, there's certain areas of the property that has like courtyards. There's 3 sides of building and there's courtyards. In there's going to be, we foresee some maybe music going on during the summer months from the restaurant, serving out there with people congregating there. There's going to be a huge village green over there. And I don't want to get too much into the details because we're going to have, our engineering team come up. But the green will be something like, farmers markets, art shows, anything that would be not just for the residents of the community, but for the entire town. But the intention here is to give this community life, to make it a place where people want to come to. It's going to be an upscale community. It's not designed for anything else. And it's designed to retain and help the local businesses retain their prized, upwardly mobile professionals, so that they don't have to keep having the turnover that they're having right now. So, great vision. How do we put this into reality? So, we had to create a team. And, the first ones on the team, we needed an engineering firm that has a lot of depth in Connecticut. We need them that they've done a lot of public work, because this is a public-private partnership, as well as private work, that knows, I don't want to use the word players, but knows the individuals and the different agencies that they have to talk to try to get this accomplished. And that's very important. And we also needed an engineering company that dealt with mixed-use developments like this, and developments that are upwardly mobile. So through our search, there was really only one candidate, which was Fuss & O'Neill. They're a 100-year-old Connecticut-based engineering firm. They're well known throughout all the different state and town agencies throughout the state, all the different towns. And we brought them on board to bring the vision to life. After that also, we wanted to create, I told you in the beginning, we wanted to create a New England feel. We're not interested in just throwing boxes up in the middle of nowhere. We want it to be more of a New England village. How do we do that? So we need a proper architectural firm, a firm that's large enough that's done a lot of mixed-use developments, as well as a firm that has the foresight to be able to give it the feel, to bring life to the oral school as well as life to the community, that they all feel like they were built together, that they all belong together. We also needed a company that has done a lot of work in historic preservation, because the oral school itself, as you know, will be preserved. And we need a company that has a lot of depth involved in that to get through the regulatory as well as construction-wise of how to do that in this piece of property. Therefore, the only choice that we had was Kroski Architects, who's well known throughout the state, that has dealt with projects like this. And we have David Goslin here today that will be able to take any kind of questions about the project at the end of our presentation. After that, again, I don't even know if we have to mention it, but Pullman Comley is another Connecticut-based law firm that's been here. I don't even know if I want to call them a law firm because they're like a super law firm, that's been in the state. They do work again for all different public agencies. Many towns use them, many state agencies use them, as well as many private entities. And we needed someone, and I tell you, it was a lot of work over the last year once we were selected as developer to get all the different state agencies together. And I tell you, we didn't even have that until like an hour ago, which was really scary. And the company to do that is Pullman & Comley, and Gary O'Connor is here tonight to also address any kind of concerns legally that you might have regarding the project. And last but not least, again, this whole aura that we're somehow doing something secretive and why is it taking so long was furthest from the truth. And we knew right away when we developed the project we're going to need a public outreach firm. And we interviewed, and a lot of the PR firms were very, in my opinion, plastic. They were, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that, and we're going to get it done for you. And it wasn't what we were looking for. When we met Chuck and Mary from Corsi and Company, they're a smaller firm, but a well-known firm throughout the state. And, it was genuinely a warm meeting. They were genuinely concerned, for how this project is going to interface with the local residents. And they were concerned as to how we're going to bring the process through and how it's going to be open and how we're going to make it transparent throughout the entire process to everyone in the town of Groton. One of the things they mentioned at the first meeting was that, you know what, we're going to be open to meeting people individually. I said, you can't start with that. How are you going to meet people individually and have individual concerns? There could be 10,000 residents. You could meet 10,000 people? And their answer was, yes, we'll meet 10,000 people. How they're going to do it, that's up to them. But but that grabbed us right away. If they're willing to go out there and at least listen and see what we can do to address concerns of the public and make it a project that's a win-win-win for everyone, that's great. So we brought them on board immediately. And as a matter of fact, Chuck is up here, and he's going to speak to you tonight as well and give you all their contact information to set up individual meeting and concerns that will be addressed to all of us as a team to see how we can implement some of your desires. So without further ado, we're going to bring up Ted DeSantis. He's the partner of Fuss & O'Neill, and he's going to discuss how we brought this vision into a reality.
Thank you, Jeff. No small order there. It's quite a vision. Very, very excited to be here with you tonight. We've been sort of waiting to show you the work that was done in response to the town's solicitation for a redevelopment of this property. And so the work that we're showing you tonight really was done in concept and in response to the town's wishes. It is historic preservation, it is adaptive reuse, and it is getting at that market demographic that's been described both by Paige and Jeff. So thank you for having us in here, and it's my great pleasure to walk you through some of the planning that's been done to date. I will say that our firm, Fuss & O'Neill, does a lot of public-private partnership, and it's important for the people here to understand that public-private partnership is different than maybe a traditional development project that you've seen in a way that I want you to understand that there's a great opportunity for you here to participate in the process and to collaborate as the plan goes from the concept that it is this evening until we come in with those applications for formal site plan approvals and eventually for building permits and so forth. So we're at the beginning of our work. As planners and engineers, there is a whole lot of work to be done to take the project from where it is through some technical due diligence. We need to look at the physical constraints, all of the issues. We need to listen to you. We need to understand your concerns. We need to answer your questions. And our design is informed by your concerns and your feedback as we go through this partnership so that the town and the developer can achieve the vision that you're hearing about. So if you'll grant me, I'm going to walk a little closer to the plan. So the master plan for the property has been laid out on the roughly 80 acres to make sure that first and foremost we are seeking to achieve the vision of the New England village. It wants to be connected, it wants to be contemporary, it wants to be suited for the use that you've heard from Jeff to get at that demographic. And so we'll start with, from a master standpoint, roughly the 80 acres. Here's the river off to the right-hand side, I-95 down the bottom, Cow Hill Road. Here's Oral School Road. And 37 acres of the property that Jeff mentioned, which are controlled by Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, will be deeded in a conservation easement and remain in perpetuity in that state. that becomes an amenity to the town as well as an amenity to the new village that's created here. On the remainder of the property, the layout of the buildings in concept in this master plan sought to stay within the footprint of where the oral school had buildings previously or where the land had been disturbed, and also to address itself to the preservation of the oral school and the Pratt building properties, so that the village wraps itself around those historic buildings, takes advantage of the great architecture and infrastructure that exists in those built spaces. Some of the features that you'll notice are the village green, and a lot of the project orients itself to the green and taking advantage of a tremendous pond there on the property. So as we get into the due diligence for the property, we know that there are certainly here tonight questions and perhaps concerns. We've heard some of this as we've stood up here about traffic. And I'll say that I've been a traffic engineer for 25 years in this state. This is not my first time in this room for Town of Groton projects. I've done a lot for Pfizer and Electric Boat, and my firm has done work for the town before. So we're not some fly-by-night company that's coming in here to sell a story. You know, we have a lot of work to do to make sure that you are going to be satisfied in your part of the partnership here on this project. What we can say in concept about the access conditions for the property are really three things. One, we know that the site access will include reconstruction and improvement of Oral School Road up to and including the intersection at Cow Hill Road. Secondly, we know that an additional point of access and main access and egress into the property will be achieved in some way through property that Ressler Homes has acquired control of. And so that driveway will find its way through this property. We know that there's rock ledge. We know that there's topography. We have to work with the Connecticut DOT. This is a state road. We have to work with them to achieve an intersection that can be approved by the state DOT somewhere along that frontage. But what we want you to understand is that you can feel a reasonable amount of confidence that there will be access and additional access. And the third point we want you to understand is that the project will not orient itself to encourage traffic down through the residential neighborhood to the south. And so Oral School Road past the southerly boundary here will not be improved. It will remain in its existing condition so as to not encourage additional traffic in that direction. Other points that should give you comfort if you have concern about traffic is that the project has to complete and submit a traffic impact study in accordance with town standards. The project also will be required to go to the state, the Office of State Traffic Administration, for state approval because of the size of the project. And so as Jeff said, and as I said at the beginning of my remarks, we are at the beginning. We have a lot of work to do to understand those access conditions, to listen to you, to make sure that what we are proposing is consistent with your wishes for the project. And as those details come along, they evolve from our public outreach and engagement. This is a fairly environmentally sustainable project from a parking standpoint, and that's really notable that Ressler Homes was encouraging us to bring a lot of innovation to the layout that you're seeing. What you don't see here are large fields of surface parking. A lot of the parking is achieved in and under the residential units, and also in a structured parking garage. So why should you care about that? Surface parking creates impervious surface that creates runoff, that creates pollutants and runoff possibly down into the groundwater and the river. So by reducing the amount of surface parking, by allowing for more infiltration, it's a far more sustainable stormwater approach to the project. You know, we've substantially decreased the amount of impervious pavement here. There's also an intention, as the project gets developed in further detail, to bring some state-of-the-art stormwater management and infiltration features to the project, and we're really excited to see how those can fit into the footprint, how they can be incorporated as part of the water feature there on the property. We really want to make sure that we are taking that preservation and environmental stewardship approach to the greatest extent possible. With that, I would like to turn things back over to Jeff.
I touched upon all this before, but you know, some of the uses that we're definitely going to want to have in this property. I tell you, there's going to be a flex, high-tech space that's going to be in there. There's going to be an upscale restaurant, bar in there. There's going to be some sort of upscale coffee house. Those are given within the community, but there's other uses that also could be done in the building. And well, I told you that there's going to be a residential component, around 750 residential units that are going to be surrounding the whole property, as you saw and explained by Ted. We also explained that the Pratt building is going to be rehabilitated for the use of all the town residents, as well as, of course, the use of the village. We spoke about the coffee house, organic market. There could be a small pharmacy there if there's a need on the property. It fits into any kind of space that's in the building. We spoke about some renovated spaces and office sharing and high-tech daycare center. There might be a need on the property for some sort of nursery or daycare center. Those small classrooms are perfect for it. You wouldn't have to do much redesigning in the building to handle that type. And we spoke about the restaurant. Those are the uses that we see. Basically, the uses that will enhance the community and make it easier for the residents and for the office people to not have to leave the property and stay here. There's also, what's not here is also some sort of a UPS site on the property to handle all the packages that might come in and to store them for the residents when they come home. So that's another use that could be done in the building. The community benefits we spoke about is bringing this property back to life, the historic preservation of it. We spoke about the open space preservation of those 37 acres that we plan on giving back to DEP for them to keep forever. The whole premise of the entire project is to attract these young mobile professionals, the Gen Zers and the millennials. And some people say, well, what does that mean for us? Can we be the? Yes, as long as you want a community that's alive and not just a place to go to sleep. This is a community for you. We spoke about the close proximity to, we didn't speak about it, but as you know, Electric Boat is looking to explode, labor force-wise. They just got approved for the whole new class of submarines. They're looking at doubling their workforce. And their biggest problem is, I did touch upon, is that their labor force. They don't know how they're going to get that labor and keep them here. And so that's this property is perfect for them because it's within a few miles of Electric Boat. The building itself is going to be approximately 100,000 square feet. That's the size of the present oral school. The Pratt building I spoke before is a 40,000 square foot building. It needs to be upgraded, but it's a beautiful facility, and I'm sure a lot of people did use it before it went down. But it needs a lot of work now to bring it back together again. It's going to be the use of the town residents as well as the village residents. We're going to upgrade the boat launch, and again, this is all now up to DEEP because we're going to give them control of the waterways. So we did speak about having this dirt pathway or stone pathway down from, which they'll give us a conservation easement on, and somehow fixing up the boat launch and the area around the boat launch, as you know, needs a little bit of work to clean it up so that it could be used more readily. We spoke about no road access, and we put that in there just because there were rumors flying. And we're happy to present now so we can try to prevent some of that. Ted touched upon it, but we did, go into contract and go into option agreements on properties in the neighborhood to give us better access for traffic, so that it will prevent the majority of homes in the neighborhood, which was very important to us because we understand that we don't want your neighborhoods overrun, and that's what's going to happen. And of course, we showed you the different technologies we're putting in to make these buildings. Of course, they're going to be Energy Star buildings. They're going to be green, but we also want a lot of greenery and life, as some of these pictures show. This is the, when you come up here later, this is that open green area that's going to be the farmer's market, art shows, whatever could be outdoors, is going to be on that village green. And I guess from there, we're going to touch upon, as part of our team, we're going to call up Ray Caron, a peer of mine. He's, hopefully he won't put you to sleep. Sometimes he does that to me, but he's a statistician and economist. But I told him to keep it very macro level. But he really crunches numbers to see what the economic benefits are going to be to, of course, us as developers. And we're in it also, to make money, and also what kind of economic input it's going to give to the town. So let me hand it over to Ray.
Yeah, hi, good evening. So as this project went through its various maturations, one of the things that I was responsible for was looking at number one, the economic feasibility. Would this actually work in the community? And what would be the benefits to the community? When I say the community, I'm talking about the town of Groton. So here's some of the things that we've come up with. The bottom line is roughly $110 million of payroll associated with people that are working at EB, Pfizer, or whatever, would actually stay in the town of Groton. And hopefully that money will be spent in the town of Groton. I think that's a very important benefit. With the oral school itself, the 100,000 square feet, the people working inside that oral school, that's another $25 million in additional payroll available to be spent in the town of Groton. Over the next 3 years, there's about 880 construction jobs associated with this project. And when we say 880 construction jobs, it's people that are actually working on the site, people working off-site like Fuss and O'Neill, Pullman and Conley, and all the suppliers. So it's 880 jobs that get supported for 3 years putting this project all together. And lastly, and I think this is important, there's roughly about $80 million that will be spent in the local retail trade area associated with this. So local merchants, whether it be downtown Mystic, whether it be downtown Groton, even in New London, that money will be spent here. It won't be going out to the suburbs, going up to Hartford, going over to Old Saybrook, or even over to Rhode Island the other way. So there's significant impact, economic impact in the community. And I think from an economist's perspective, as Jeff was mentioning 3 days ago, EB signed a contract with the Navy to build 9 submarines. Okay, they have an option to build a 10th. The reason the Navy did not award the full, what they had initially proposed, was the Navy was very concerned about EB's ability to attract the workforce that it needs. And one of the benefits of this project is, EB needs to attract, educated engineers, software engineers, designers, and they are used to a certain quality of housing, and this project is designed to provide that housing and attract those workers. So when EB is out recruiting at UConn or out recruiting at Trinity or any of the universities around the state or around the country, and the people, those college kids, whether they're undergrads or graduate students, because EB hires both at the graduate level and undergrad level, EB can say, go take a look here. There's a community of housing that you're going to be attracted to. Those are some very tangible benefits of this particular project. And I'm going to turn this over to Chuck now, and Chuck will talk about outreach.
Great. Thank you, Ray. Good evening. My name is Chuck Corsi, and as Jeff said, I'm with Corsi & Company. My wife, Mary, who many of you might have met on the way in. We've been doing community outreach for economic development projects in Connecticut for over 25 years. Started when I was 16. Is this thing on? Okay. I want to reiterate what everybody has said, though, tonight, that this is not the end of the process. This is the beginning of the process. I am really excited to work on this project for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that Mary and I have the opportunity to do community outreach from day one. A lot of times we get brought into projects that are very well along. Neighbors have not been kept apprised of what's going on. There's a lot of questions in the community, a lot of resentment built up in the community because people haven't been informed along the process. It's an honor, and we do our best work when we're allowed to come in at the beginning of the process, which is tonight. Again, it's a long process. I've heard, this could be up to a year-long process. What our goal is, and let me tell you what community outreach isn't. It isn't trying to convince people that this project is the greatest thing since apple pie. Our job is to go into the community, talk to people, especially those who may be most impacted by the project, like those in the surrounding neighborhoods. I don't think there's 10,000 people in the surrounding neighborhoods, but we're going to reach out to everyone in all the neighborhoods because that really is understandably where people are going to have the most questions and the most concerns. And what we're going to do is we're going to listen. We're going to listen to what their questions are, listen to their concerns, and go back with the team and figure out how and if we can address those concerns. There's no such thing as a small concern or a small question. That's my commitment to you. So one of the things that I do ask, because I know I'm a little funny looking, and people sometimes don't want to engage. The only way that we can address the concern that you might have is that if you talk to us. A lot of times I'll call up people, I'll visit, I'll knock on their door. But really the only way that we can find out what you're concerned about and how we can address that concern is if there's communication. So I promise, my commitment and my promise to the community is that, and I'm going to be up here with cards, and I guarantee you're going to get sick of seeing myself and all of us over the course of the coming months. But my commitment, I will meet with anyone, anywhere, at a convenient time, mutually convenient time, to talk about this project. So with that, I'm going to hand the program back over to Paige. We're going to be up here. If folks have other questions that they want to address, we're not going anywhere until they throw us out, I guess. But we really appreciate your time. We know that this is a very exciting project, and a lot of folks that have questions and concerns, and that's why we're here. We want to start today on day one to address those questions and concerns. So I'll hand it back to Paige. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. We did envision allowing some questions from the audience this evening. Again, this is not necessarily a hearing, but we're very much interested in hearing your commentary. Two phases on that, though. We are willing to answer some questions, but similar to when we started at 6:30 tonight, what we really believe most of the benefit can be obtained is in dealing with the one-on-one interaction. So we'll take a few questions, we'll try to provide the answers that we can, but we're really hoping if people have a desire for real communication, introducing yourself to the development team, and trying to foster a long-term relationship as this unfolds, that you would come up after we do the questioning so that you can introduce yourself, understand the team. If you haven't already looked at the posters, ask for clarification on anything that was stated tonight. But I will take a few questions if anyone is interested. Yes?
Thank you for this presentation. I think it's an awesome use of the property. Because the details are very important. The one area, though, that I don't think you addressed is public transportation, which is something that's an ongoing problem in this area. I know you've talked about the employees. A lot of EB people would love to be able to find a way to get to work without their car. We have certainly Mystic itself, there's some issues. We have another 720 people trying to get down into Mystic. It's going to add another problem. So we really do need to have that on your agenda as to how to help solve not just because of your development, but already the ongoing problem we have with transportation. This may be a wonderful time to focus on that.
I'm actually going to try to field that first, and then I'll hand it over. It's interesting. We had an EDC meeting tonight, and at the meeting, we discussed collaboration. We discussed sector and Nancy Kauser in working with our Council of Government. And we're really fortunate in dealing with all of our partners. Recently, there has been basically a joint land use study that has dealt with housing, but also transportation. And just this morning, we were talking about how we link those and how we can make better connections with transit. There need to be improvements in transit throughout the entire region. And we specifically talked about our workforce, where they go, where they work, but also where they live and where the nodes are that possibly we could expand service. And from a transit standpoint, it's always better if you can concentrate your housing in mixed-use developments such as this. And I think it's easier for SEAT as well, or other operators, to try to address that in moving forward. But that is a topic that is that we're dealing with within the region. Specific to the project, does anyone want to address that?
Thank you, sir, for that comment. I think that's a good point. As we get ready to make applications to the state eventually, we do have to have a part of our formal submission has to address public transportation. But just here talking to Jeff, while Paige was speaking, he mentioned that in his outreach, as he was doing his homework and going out and meeting with Electric Boat, that Electric Boat mentioned the possibility of transit or shuttle connection for their workforce down to their facility. So, whether it's connecting to the village or regionally through the SEAT program or to the major employers, Pfizer, Electric Boat, I think that there's a lot of good that could come from reducing those single occupant vehicles.
Good evening. I'm Beth Tillman. I live on River Road. I have 84 acres contiguous to the Town of Groton open space, the DEP, and the Oral School property. So you can understand kind of probably where I'm coming from, although not trying to be a NIMBY. I would like to know, other than the path through the DEP property, is there any plan to have any kind of passive or active recreation on that? And in conjunction with that, is there any plan for the Town of Groton to open up that open space to any kind of passive or active recreation?
The lower land area that DEEP controls, that's what you were referring to, correct?
And also Town of Groton open space, the 40 acres.
I cannot address that per se from the Town of Groton standpoint, but I can specify that the DEEP portion, we were very much in favor of seeing some trails for passive recreation, but not active recreation.
May I clarify just slightly? Because those of us in the neighborhood, when the Mystic Community Center sold the property to the Town of Groton, it had been our understanding at that point that the deed was in perpetuity for open space. Much to our horror, about 10 years later, we discovered that that little clause had not been inserted in the deed. And of course, that struck kind of fear and terror in our hearts. So with the DEP, I walked all of that land with the surveyor for the DEP, and it had been my understanding that that land had already been transferred to them. For you now to be saying that you're going to give back 37 acres to the DEP, again, kind of fear and terror is struck into my heart because it was supposedly already a done deal.
I had stated that in the beginning that that's all one parcel at this point in time, but it's split between two state agencies. And I think it's everyone's intent for DEP to actually control that property long-term, but the state of Connecticut owns that parcel today. It's my understanding, and Gary seems like he's ready to chime in, that there is no conservation easement on that property today. I cannot speak for the state, but that long-term, the intent is that the state would place a conservation easement. Did you want to make a comment to that front?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. We've talked to DEP and to the governor's office about their property. We have no intention of developing it. In fact, you know, we've tried to figure out the best way to handle it. And even though the RFP said that their property was coming with the project, we've entered into an agreement, purchase and sale agreement, where that 37 plus, it's almost 38 acres, is being retained by the state under the control of DEP. And so we won't own it. You know, what we said to DEP is if through this process, you know, if folks want an upgrade of the, you know, the boat launch or kayak launch, if they want, you know, a trail in the property so that you can visit different sites on it, we will be amenable to doing that. But that is not going to be something we impose on either DEP or the community. That's something that the community can tell DEP what they want, and is part of our contribution back to the community. We will pay for some of those amenities. But it may be that you don't want it, and so it won't happen. I mean, that's the reality. That's why we did, you know, at the end of the day, I guess it was my decision with the state, is we're not taking that property. It'll create too much confusion. We don't want it. We don't want to develop it. We don't want anybody to possibly think we can develop it. So it's staying with DEP. So,
John Reiner.
yep.
Good evening, John Reiner, Director of Planning and Development for the town. I think the piece of property you're talking about is a piece that's currently owned by the town just north of the Mystic Ed Center property. We have no plans of developing that property into active recreation. Could it get additional trails or some trails in conjunction with this property? Yes, we haven't gotten to that stage of the planning yet. There's no plans for ball fields going down the hill or anything along those lines for that property, the Mystic Ed Center property, or the piece of property just to the north that's controlled currently by the town. I think that's the piece that you might have been, yes, the 40 acres, yes. Yes. So.
I want to make sure that we move this along because at some point we're actually going to end the meeting, and I want to allow for some engagement with the development community, the developers one-on-one, but I want to take a few others if we could move them along.
Hi, Elisa Wright, Pearl Street, Noank. It was my understanding when this property was declared excess property by the state, and I was in the legislature at that time, that DEP indicated that it wished to retain care, custody, and control of two separate parcels of the Mystic Educational Center property. One comprising 36.8 acres and a separate parcel comprising 24.5 acres. And those two properties bookend the town-owned open space of 39.5 acres. In this presentation here, there was discussion of only, I believe, the 36.8, 37 acre parcel that DEP retained for conservation use. That would be I guess, either transferred to this, retained by the state. What about the other 24.5 acres? Attorney O'Connor, perhaps you could answer that question.
I'm looking at the map over your shoulder.
Yeah.
That property is not that's not a part of the development.
This 24.5?
That is not a part of the development.
Okay.
So it will be retained by the state.
That will also be retained by the state. So that is part of the property, though.
But it's not part of what we're talking about
It's not
tonight.
part of, so what is the two separate parcels within the Mystic Educational Center that the DEP retained will remain under control of DEP. And the reason it wasn't mentioned here is that it's not, that 24.5 acres is not in play.
That's correct.
Okay.
Next question.
Thank you. Should I just ask you?
We can get through a few questions.
Should I ask you? Hi. I just have a question. I just want to be clear that currently what you're presenting to us is that the Mystic Oral School buildings will be renovated as new, and including the Pratt building for the community center, and the housing will be new construction. And the parking will be underneath the residential buildings. And is that correct?
I don't know if it's on.
Yes, I think the numbers are around 80%. 80% of the residential needs for parking are going to be handled, 75, 80, don't know, are going to be handled underneath the building. There's a parking garage that's going to be created on the site to handle the needs of the oral school itself for the flex office space, as well as extra space and parking for the residents in the community, as well as space for the use of the Pratt building by the residents in the local town. There's going to be approximately, that building is not cheap, it's going to be around a 500 parking car garage to handle all these needs, and that's why that's expensive, and we did it so that we can keep the property green without creating all these massive parking fields.
I'm going to field maybe two more questions, and that type of dialogue, the details, and the follow-up questioning is something that we want, but I think I would really promote people and encourage them to come up after this meeting, have a conversation so that those detailed questions can be answered the best way possible.
Will your plan address the impacts that it will have, that this development will have on the local schools? Primarily, it seems like it would be more on the elementary schools than the middle schools and the high schools, but still, if you're going to bring that many families in, that could have a potential on the elementary schools.
Yeah, I can answer that question because we actually looked at that, in the economic impact study. So the demographic that we're looking to attract here and what the community needs are basically employees that are 22 to 35 years old. You're probably aware that families today are starting much later than they have historically. So there will be an impact, except that it's going to be actually pretty minimal. The bottom line is going to be pretty minimal. So.
I'm going to go to this side of the room. Zell.
Zell Stever, 81 Main Street, Groton. Could either the development team or the town just outline briefly for us what the process will be going forward, because I think while you've made it clear that we can come up and talk to you, I think there would be an interest in the community to know sort of what are the next steps now. Is it going to be drawing board, or is it going to be to which commission, and then how will that all fit together so that we have some sense of the process going forward, so that at some point you can put the silver shovel in the ground?
Well, I can start that discussion, but we're still working on a complete detailed listing, but there are a number of processes that entail state, local, still working on the final land agreements with the state. There's also a master lease agreement that the developer's working on. We have Connecticut DOT traffic permits that will be required. Only within Groton alone, we have to do a zoning amendment. We actually will have to deal with wetland approvals. We'll have to deal with special permit. There will be local plan review, and I'm sure I'm missing some other steps. That's why we've talked about this being a year-long approval process between state and local approvals. So what I stated may not necessarily be in that exact order. Basically understand that this is going to be a long process, and this is the first opportunity that we've been able to come out and actually advise the public. Are there other, yes?
So that's a great question, and I'll just add a couple more details and be glad to share more depth if you wanted to come up afterwards. But in addition to what Paige has already said, there's brownfields remediation work to be done here that is subject to review by Connecticut DEEP to abate and remediate the buildings and to make them appropriate for adaptive reuse for residential and community benefits. We have some environmental permits that need to be additional permits through DEEP for construction stormwater discharge, all of the local and state approvals that Paige mentioned. But in a public-private partnership, it's also important for you to understand the part of the process from the public side, and that is all of the work in planning and design and preparing for permits is informed by pricing and pro formas and looking at all of the cost and constructability and phasing of all of the on-site and off-site improvements. And so in some ways, a project of this scale and the benefit it can bring to the town is like a Swiss watch. There are a lot of moving parts between the formal and informal process with the town, and that's why folks are saying a year, and it could take all of that.
I knew I was going to get at least one, and one is a very significant one, and that is a local development agreement. What that basically is going to do is it's a significant legal document that binds the developer and Groton in understanding what the deal is. So we've gone through this long process, and as John Reiner often says, I think we found our dance partner, but how do we consummate that deal? And this legal agreement that will be addressed by the council will contain a number of details. There will be public meetings, and it will be on an agenda. People will be aware of that item that comes before the council. Just two more questions.
Could you address taxes? You haven't mentioned anything about taxes yet.
Repeat that, please.
Could you address taxes? You haven't mentioned taxes yet.
I thought we did, but do you want to reiterate the taxes?
So, property taxes, the benefit to the town as far as property tax is concerned, this is a rough number, so just don't hold me to it. But it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.5 million, the net tax benefit to the town. Abatements? I'm not aware of that.
What funds the
I'm not. Yeah, so, oh, are you talking about for the infrastructure, off-site and on-site infrastructure improvements? The whole thing. Well, there's, there's the private, the partners that Jeff has provide the equity, and then there's bank financing to actually build the project. And then there is a tax incremental financing that's contemplated with the town that we're just beginning to discussing with the town to fund the off-site and on-site infrastructure improvements. Part of that TIF financing is to help fund the remediation. There's a significant amount of remediation that still needs to be done. The state, when they owned the property, they had done a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 environmental impact, studies. The state actually commenced cleanup on the property. They did not finish it. And that is now up to us to finish, Jeffrey's team to finish. So.
I'll take one last question. But again, I want to reinforce that we're interested in sticking around and hearing from you when we conclude this meeting. I'm really hoping that takes place. Please come up, introduce yourself. They're going to hang around for quite a while and be able to continue this dialogue. So hopefully some relationships can build, and also you can get an understanding. If you have any further questions, they can provide those answers.
You had many discussions about the property itself, but every time we have a major development in the Mystic area.
Just lower it to your mouth.
Lower? Sorry. You haven't mentioned anything about the road access, and the roads into the oral school have always been tiny, convoluted, and difficult intersections. And I would hope you were addressing that, because when you put a new population of considerable size, their access in and out is going to be an additional burden on the community.
I do believe that they do plan on addressing it. They covered it to some degree, but maybe we could do a quick recap.
Yes, sir. So, yeah, sure. So from an access standpoint, what we talked about is that as the project abuts Oral School Road, that there will be reconstruction of Oral School Road reaching north and including the intersection at Cow Hill Road, as well as another driveway connection down through property that the developer has control of to an additional intersection somewhere along Cow Hill Road, and that's going to be subject to state DOT approvals because it's a state roadway. So we understand that it needs contemporary and appropriate safe access and egress, and that's part of the work that we're getting started on now.
Again, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, and I hope you don't leave. I hope you stick around. Make sure you come forward. If you haven't already, meet the team. Thank you very much.